And just a program note too, we're going 10 minutes overtime today for those who set their diaries according to insiders, and we've still got Mike Bowers coming up with one of the Chaser boys, so stay around for that. Dennis, let's look at Queensland then. It's the state you know best. Take us through the seats that will really matter in Queensland.
Yeah, well, in Queensland is really unusual. I can't recall an election where more than half of the seats in one state are in play. There's 16 of the 30 seats are in play. Now, these seats are the ones which Labor is in danger of losing, and they go from right up at Cape York with Leichhardt, Dawson, Flynn, which are mining seats around Mackay and Gladstone, and then down to Brisbane, the outer suburban seats of Ford and Longman and Petrie, and then the inner city seat of Brisbane, which has got its own particular problems.
And then you've got Herbert and Dixon. Now, they're two seats that are held by Liberals, and Anthony was explaining that before, and yet they're notionally Labor.
Yes.
On the face of it, that should make it easier for the Liberals to defend.
It should, although in Herbert they've got a very popular former mayor of Townsville running for the Labor Party, Tony Mooney, and the incumbent Liberal, Peter Lindsay, is retiring. So it's an open contest in that sense. And I think even the Liberals are starting to say they don't think they can make it in Herbert. In Dixon, it's a different story. Two things go in the Liberals' favour in Dixon. One is that Peter Dutton is a very popular local member, even though he tried to walk away from the seat. I think he's got over that. He's also a very good local campaigner, and he's also a very good fundraiser. People tell me that there'll be more money spent in the seat of Dixon than probably in any other seat that the Liberals are defending.
And Lenore, you don't hear people in the Labor Party talk about an increased majority, even under Julia Gillard's leadership, and perhaps that's because of Queensland, that there will be losses, and it's hard to see where they make them up in the rest of the country.
That's true, and they're also quite worried about New South Wales, where they're defending at least 8 seats, and so 8 marginals. And so I think between them, they figure that if they can minimise the loss of seats, that's the best case scenario at this stage. And of course, a lot of the published polling is based on assumptions about green preference flows, which in the current climate, sorry, that wasn't meant to be a pun, in the current situation are just that, assumptions. The Green vote is historically high, and so in those lower house seats where the Greens aren't necessarily going to direct their preferences anyway and people make up their own minds, you know, really it's all pretty open.
And Michael, in New South Wales, I mean, you get the sense that things are better for Labor than they were under Kevin Rudd's leadership, but it's still a very, very difficult ask in some of those seats.
Well, I think Sydney is probably the real concentration, the focus of where the new urban bottlenecks that have come from the fast growth of Australia are really hitting. Housing prices, housing planning, transport, congestion we've heard, which are hitting Brisbane as well. And I think given with the New South Wales Labor government that's been in there a long time, a premier there that really also said no growth. Bob Carr said we don't want any more growth in Sydney. And what happened? We got the growth and it was just badly planned and it's ended up with a mess now. And I think that's really one of the key things that Labor is trying to react against and trying to counter with rejecting the big Australia idea.
But is there a view in New South Wales, though, that, look, it won't be too long now before we get a crack at the state government, so we'll just put that to one side and then make a separate judgment on the federal government? Yeah,
I think so, and from what I understand, that is showing up in the polling of both of the major parties. In New South Wales, there's an execution date, which is March next year. People have got it circled on their calendars, if they've got calendars for next year.
They're collecting their stones.
They've got the weapons in the back room, and they know they're going to go out and they're going to punish the New South Wales government. We got a dress rehearsal in Penrith a few weeks ago when Labor barely managed a quarter of the vote. In Queensland, it's a different situation. There's no execution date. There's at least 2 more years of this government left, and people are very angry with Anna Bligh, and I think Anna Bligh is a huge problem for federal Labor in Queensland, and it's going to be made worse on August 1 when she becomes national president of the Labor Party.
Oh, right on cue.
Yes. That was one of Kevin Rudd's ideas, by the way.
And Western Australia, Lenore, that was at one stage Labor was actually talking about the prospect of losing all of their seats in WA. What's the situation now?
Well, I think it's probably improved a bit with the the deal on the mining tax, so they don't have the big mining companies campaigning against them there. But there's still outstanding issues. The health deal hasn't been signed with Western Australia, and there's this sort of exceptionalism mindset where, you know, Canberra isn't taking Western Australia's concerns seriously on a range of issues. So I think they've still got quite a struggle in Western Australia as well.
Do you think that's right? Like Gary Gray's seat, for example, was at one stage in doubt. How do you think that's looking?
Well, people say that the vote bounced back in Western Australia for Labor very strongly. That once it looked like the mining tax wasn't the problem it was going to be, Labor's vote bounced back. People were saying before Kevin Rudd was deposed as Prime Minister that Labor was only confident of holding one seat in Western Australia, and that was Fremantle. All the rest, they were just scratching them off their lists. They now say that maybe they'll get an even outcome of losing Hasluck, picking up Swan. Who knows? Labor is much more confident about Western Australia, but, you know, as Lenore pointed out, there are various problems with Western Australia. One is that it's so far away.
And there are other states and territories as well, but there aren't as many seats in balance in South Australia, in Tasmania and Victoria. Though I get the sense Victoria is almost a sort of a win-some, lose-some situation, like there could be a seat lost, a seat gained. It's kind of that sort of situation.
Yep, yeah, I think that's the case. I was talking to someone in the Labor Party at the end of the week about their tracking poll, and he said that those three states, South Australia, Victoria and Tasmania, aren't a big problem, and they might even pick up a few. And I said, well, what's the difference there? And he said, boat people aren't an issue in any of those states.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely...
Do we have a real issue on taking the polls as to when we get to the ultimate ballot? You know, how do people finally react to Julia Gillard, the Kevin Rudd execution, when they go into the ballot box, and also how do they finally react to Tony Abbott? You know, do they make that call or not? I think this is really yet to be tested out by a national ballot, which adds a bit of uncertainty to a lot of the polling.
Oh yeah, and another bit of uncertainty and a reason not to give too much attention to national polls, even though they are important and they are interesting. Both sides are reporting that the swings are very uneven. They're saying that in Queensland you've got seats that are next to each other, one which has got a 5-6% swing against Labor, the other one hasn't budged, no swing whatsoever.
I think that's absolutely right, and the parties are doing a lot of seat-based campaigning, which flies under the radar, which we sitting in Canberra don't necessarily see, but which has a lot of play in that seat. So I think that will have a big impact as well.
Yeah.
And debates. There will be one, you'd imagine, though they're arguing, aren't they, over the details, where it'll be, how it'll be conducted?
The first week of the election campaign, we have a big fight about the debates. Some want 3, there's definitely one. We'll end up somewhere in the middle, yeah?
Well, Kevin Rudd promised 3, but that's gone with Kevin Rudd.
Yeah, although this was Kevin Rudd's big strategy. And whenever people talked to him about how he was going to beat Tony Abbott, he said the debates. He said,
of the health debate.
He said, I beat him in health and I'll beat him again and I'll have 3 debates. He was going to do that. I'm a bit surprised that Labor is only going to have one. It shows a bit of a lack of confidence in Julia Gillard that surprises me.
OK, and in the last few days before the campaign was called, there was a bit of nervousness among the two leaders, and I think that showed up in one or two of the things they had to say. Here they are.
We will move back into deficit much more strongly than the government. If you want to stop the votes, you've got to vote for Kevin.
If I can make a comment firstly about, it's not the centre of your question, but about Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. Bob Hawke and Paul Keating.
OK, more with our panel shortly. Dennis Atkins, Michael Stutchbury and Lenore Taylor. But now here's Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.